But today, I want to cover a subject that is topical in the United Kingdom. It does cover the fact that we are not to get involved in the political ways of this society and that we are to keep ourselves separate. The upcoming days of unleavened bread show us that we are to put leaven, that is sin, out of our lives, and being a part of this society's way, which is something that we must avoid at all costs. The title of the sermon today is, My Candidate is Not Standing. Now, in May of this year, in about just under 6 weeks' time, the United Kingdom will go to the polls for the 2015 general election. We had one in 2010, and we're now having them every 5 years. Next year, in about 18 months' time, you will have the presidential election in the United States. Now, today, I'm primarily talking about the United Kingdom, but there can be little difference in the approach in the United Kingdom as there is in the USA, Canada, and other countries. We have already seen in the UK politicians of all persuasions out trying to get the attention of voters and their vote, and that will continue right up to polling day. Churchmen will get involved, and on the BBC News website, just a few weeks ago, on the 17th of February, the following report was published. It said, in a letter urging congregations to vote on the 7th of May, the House of Bishops said that it does not endorse a political party, but encourages debate on issues such as nuclear defence and the economy. This is about the Church of England, of course, involved in politics. They said, we want to encourage people to engage more deeply with politics. Politicians need to deliver a fresh, moral vision ahead of the general election, the Church of England says. We want to encourage people to engage more deeply with politics. The 52-page letter, an unprecedented intervention by the House of Bishops, says, now listen to this, it is the duty of every Christian adult to vote, even though it may be a vote for something less than a vision that inspires us. One Conservative MP said she believed the letter had glaring inaccuracies regarding the economy, and the church should be more concerned with issues people wanted to hear its views on, such as abortion. Interesting comments. I don't know whether you read this, but the Archbishop of Canterbury was reported as saying in a sermon in New York recently that Jesus did not permit us to turn religion into morality. Of course, he'll be banning sin next. But I can't vote because my candidate is not standing. Just look at any candidate you want, and I do mean any candidate standing in any constituency or state for any party at any election at any time. Just ask yourself these questions. Are they promoting the true Christian message? Are they totally opposed to abortion? Are they totally opposed to homosexuality? Do they denounce evils in society? Do they even know what the evils are? Do they promote God's law? Will they publicly promote the Ten Commandments, including the fourth? Will they pursue the goal of eliminating blasphemy in our society? Will they uphold the sanctity of marriage? Will they assist the true church to get airtime on radio and television and the media in general to get the message out? Will they? You continue the list yourself. There is not one candidate who has the right agenda anywhere in the world, not one. So today I want to cover 4 areas, and the 4 areas I want to cover are, first of all, I want to prove that we as true Christians should never vote. Now, of course, covering these four areas, I'll only be able to do this briefly. Secondly, I want to look at some of the issues that are being part of the political debate. Thirdly, I want to look at some of the moral issues that will not get debated. There is always a missing spiritual dimension in any political agenda. And fourthly, I want to look at the coarsening and general deterioration of society, which has been the legacy of so many governments and politicians. So firstly, the question of voting, and this is just a quick look. We have much information on this, so it's something that you can look up later on, but I'll give you some brief information. Now, you might say that today I am preaching to the choir. Yes, indeed I am. Hopefully I am in our fellowship. But I understand that elsewhere, in some parts of the Church of God, voting is now deemed to be okay. Well, I hope by the time I finish today, you will see that it is not okay. It can be tempting when there is an important issue to say that we would like to cast a vote in favor of a very important principle or issue, but it is a temptation that we must totally resist. In our update, number 76, in January 2004, 11 years ago, the following comments were made, and these are repeated in the booklet that Mr. Link wrote, Should You Fight in War? Quote, in addition, when one votes for a particular political candidate, one votes for the totality of the person. Some have argued that one needs to vote for candidate X rather than candidate Z or Z as constituting the lesser evil. Following that kind of reasoning, one would still vote for an evil which a Christian could not do. As it says in 1 Thessalonians 5:22, and I'm not turning there, it says, abstain from every form of evil. Someone might want to vote for candidate X as that candidate might reject abortion. However, the same candidate might, on the other hand, support the tobacco industry or the pollution of the environment. A Christian could not support such a candidate who might be right on the one issue, but who would still be wrong on other issues. In addition, as stated above, every candidate would support his right as the future president or leader of the nation to declare war on other nations. I think that's fairly clear, and I would hope that we all understand that. I'd like to think that everybody in the Church of God, whichever fellowship, would understand that, but apparently not. Mr. Herbert Armstrong wrote the following. He said, Jesus' disciples live in the present evil world as though they were foreigners, here merely as the guests of the nation where they reside as ambassadors for Christ and his coming kingdom, not of any of this world's governments. A foreign ambassador does not involve himself in making their state where he lives a better state, or voting, or entering their army or fighting for their cause. The true Christian is one who follows Christ, and Christ did not vote. Jesus did not try to reform Caesar. He preached the doctrine of a radically different world to come. This is Satan's world, and Jesus Christ did not come to reform Satan or improve Satan's handiwork, but to save his followers from Satan and his system. Since God's kingdom is not literally set up as yet, the true Christian citizenship is now reserved in heaven. End of quote. You might want to make a note of 2 Corinthians 5 verse 20, which tells us that we are ambassadors for Christ. If you turn to John 17 verses 12 to 16, at the Passover each year we read from the book of John as part of the ceremony, and here Jesus, before his crucifixion, said the following. Verse 12, while I was with them in the world, I kept them in your name. Those whom you gave me I have kept, and none of them is lost except the son of perdition, that the scripture might be fulfilled. But now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in them. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Christ is clearly saying that his disciples, his followers, are not of this world. We don't behave and act the way the world does. That is the society around us. We have to live in the world, but not be part of it. Now, there's much more information about not voting, not being involved in the world and its systems and practices, but what I've quoted today should be sufficient to prove the point that we are not to get involved. And so, having put in place some of the reasons why we must not vote, let me move on to the second point. And the second point is I want to look at some of the issues that have been part of the current political debate. Now, each party, of course, will raise the issues that show them up in the best light, but those issues that seem to have come to the fore are the usual ones: education, health, the economy, law and order, and in the UK particularly, immigration. Let's start with education. What is going on in this area of life in the UK today? There are claims, there are counterclaims. The government's previous attempts to get about 50% of school leavers to go to university may have seemed at the time a laudable aim to some. But education, just for the sake of education, particularly when there are those who have no interest in it whatsoever, can be an exercise in futility. On top of that, education is generally underpinned by the theory of evolution. Mr. Armstrong said in his book, Tomorrow What It Will Be Like, pages 12 and 13, the following. He said, education is decadent, but take a realistic look at this world's civilization. We look at modern education first because it is the mother, the alma mater, which has spawned the scientists, captains of industry and business, the politicians, the rulers, the leaders in the modern social order, the theologians. Today's world is what its leaders have made it, and the leaders are the product of modern education. Education is defined by the Encyclopedia Britannica as a system by which the adult leaders of a society inject their philosophies, their ideas, customs, and culture into the minds of the growing generation. Education is, and has been through the centuries, essentially pagan in origin and character. The academic system was founded by the pagan philosopher Plato. The 19th and 20th centuries have witnessed the absorption of German rationalism. Of course, the Germans get the blame for everything, don't they? German rationalism into the educational bloodstream, an approach that regards human reason as the chief source and test of knowledge. There has been a dangerous drift into materialism and collectivism. God is ignored. Revelation is rejected. The ancient belief of Gnosticism, meaning we know, was succeeded by agnosticism, meaning we don't know, we're ignorant. This ignorance is glorified as knowledge. Professing themselves to be wise, have not the educated become fools? And then he says, compare this with Romans 1:22, which I'll just quote, where it says, professing to be wise, they became fools. Modern education trains students to earn a living in the professions, occupations, and vocations, but fails to teach them how to live. It commits the crime of developing the machine, but it fails to develop the man. A tree is known by its fruits. A mixed up, unhappy and fearful world in chaos, divided against itself, filled with heartaches, frustrations, broken homes, juvenile delinquency, crime, insanity, racial hatreds, riots and violence, wars and deaths, devoid of honesty, truth and justice, now facing extinction by man-inflicted cosmicide. That is the fruit of modern education. I thought they were very succinct comments and to the point. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians 3, verses 18 and 19. If we want to know what God thinks to the wisdom of this world, we can get a very clear answer. It is a very scathing one. 1 Corinthians 3, verse 18. It says, "Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him become a fool that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness to God." The wisdom of this world is foolishness to God. And those involved with the educational system would certainly fit into that category. It has seemed to me, for as long as I can remember, that there have been problems and crises in the education service. Whatever any politician promises at the upcoming election, there will be no real answer to the problems because, amongst other things, it is based on the ungodly concept and idea of evolution. There will be no answer to these problems until Christ returns and puts proper values in place. As true Christians, we certainly couldn't vote for politicians who make promises on education when the basis is all wrong in the first place. And what about discipline in schools today? It seems almost non-existent, with pupils having the whip hand. In my day at grammar school, I know that's a long, long time ago, there were deterrents, including the cane, and respect was high. Today, there is no respect for teachers. Pupils seem to do as they like in so many cases. The liberalization of society and the disappearance of proper values have been allowed by these same politicians that now want to be voted in again, so that schools today are simply not nice places to be involved with. And bullying seems to be rife. I'll quote Mr. Armstrong again about education in the future in his book on pages 63 and 64, and I make no apology for quoting this because it is to the point. He says, in God's millennial civilization, the basis of all knowledge dissemination will be revelation. Light will replace darkness. Truth will replace error. Understanding will replace crass materialism. True knowledge will replace intellectual ignorance. One of the great problems facing the returned, glorified Christ will be that of re-educating the supposedly educated minds. These minds, and they are indeed the world's finest and best minds, have become so perverted with false education that they will be unable to accept truth until they first unlearn error. And it is at least 10 times more difficult to unlearn error firmly embedded in the mind than it is to start from scratch and learn new truth. It may actually take them longer to come to a knowledge of the truth, to become truly educated, than the illiterate of this world. God's inspired word, the Holy Bible, is the foundation of knowledge, but they have been trained to hold this true foundation in prejudiced contempt. Yes, indeed, the educating and re-educating of the world will be one of the most important tasks the kingdom of God will face after Christ returns to rule. Today, people will follow the false and deceptive values. Their entire thinking will require a reorientation, a change of direction. End of quote. Could any politician of any persuasion anywhere in the world put across such a program for endorsing God's way and for the electorate to vote for it and for him to have the ability and the facility to implement that. Not a chance on either account. Please turn to 1 Corinthians 1 verses 26 to 28, and we will see why we can see this, but the wise or the great of this world, not one of the politicians can see it. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 26. It says, "For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many noble, not many mighty are called, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised, God has chosen. And the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are." We can't vote for politicians at the next election because the candidate that will change all things to how they should be is not standing. Let's move on to health. The National Health Service in the United Kingdom keeps getting more and more money pumped into it, but it is never, ever enough. It reminds me of the verse in Haggai, if you'll turn there, Haggai 1 verse 6, right at the end of the Old Testament. This was a time when God said that his house should be built. The people lived in panelled houses, a sign of luxury, and the temple lay in ruins. A question of priorities not being quite right. Haggai 1 verse 6 says, "You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but do not have enough. You drink, but you are not filled with drink. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages to put in a bag with holes." That very principle applies to the National Health Service in the UK. However much money you will put into it, it will never be enough. It's like a bag with holes. The money just keeps disappearing. You could double the amount. 100 billion a year goes into it. Make that 200 billion a year. It still wouldn't be enough. The problem is that politicians almost always talk about the effect rather than the cause, although the government is taking some small steps by encouraging better eating habits. They also put health warnings on cigarettes, but when someone is dying of lung cancer, often caused by their smoking and stupidity, they need the National Health Service to help their medical situation. But prevention is always better than cure. There are claims, there are counterclaims, there always are when politicians are concerned. At various times, the government have claimed in the UK that hospital waiting lists are at their lowest in England since 1987. We've been told that in the National Health Service, there are 19,300 more doctors and over 77,500 more nurses working with modern equipment, giving faster access to more people, all free at the point of need. Sounds good, doesn't it? But then the opposition parties come up with another set of statistics. Who has the better set of stats? That's what it goes down to. You could write a book about all of the various arguments, but there is no question that if only people would start obeying God and his instructions, the need for the NHS would be greatly reduced. Let's turn to Leviticus 11 and let us very briefly review God's food laws. Leviticus 11. Leviticus 11 verses 1 to 3. "These are the beasts which you shall eat." A principle regarding clean land animals is stated first. That is, they must have hooves that are split and they must chew the cud. Verses 4 to 8, in synopsis, camels, rock badgers, rabbits and swine are examples of quadrupeds which do not meet these tests. The rock badgers and rabbits have a motion which looks like a chewing of the cud, but is not. Verses 9 to 12, the category of marine life required fish to have scales. This eliminates catfish, various forms of shellfish, oysters, clams, lobsters, frogs, squids, and the thought of that of being food just turns me over. Verses 13 to 19, listed here are only those among the bird family which may not be eaten. Anyone who studies the habits of these creatures will readily understand that they are primarily birds of prey and carrion eaters. Verses 20 to 23, all flying insects that creep. All insects were forbidden except 4 kinds of locusts that had jumping legs. The phrase creep on all fours is a common way of saying walking. Verse 27 to 31. Besides those listed earlier, animals with paws, which would include the dog and the cat families, including lions and tigers, and certain reptiles, were also unclean. And verse 44, it says, "For you shall be holy, for I am holy." This is the key verse of Leviticus. The basis of these laws was grounded in the holiness of God. Let's read verses 44 to 47. God's people are to be set apart unto him. Verse 44, "For I am the Lord your God. You shall neither consecrate yourselves, and you shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy. For I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For I am the Lord, which brings you out of the land of Egypt, to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters, and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten." Is God someone who wants to deny us the good things of life? Well, of course not. But he knew that if we ate the wrong kinds of food, that would be bad for our health. But the government of the day and the politicians in general have absolutely no concept of the food laws that were given for our benefit. My candidate, who is not standing at this election, will restore good health to all when he is in power, something that the present crop of politicians simply cannot do. If you'll turn to Jeremiah 30, verse 17, Jeremiah 30, verse 17, this is all about conditions in the world tomorrow, and this will not be the norm until that time, a time that we should all be praying for. Jeremiah 30, verse 17. It says, "For I will restore." That means they didn't have it in the past. "I will restore health to you and heal you of your wounds, says the Lord." So we know when it's going to get better, and it's not in this age. Let us look at Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 to 6, where we see that ancient Israel were given instructions and were told that there can be blessings for obedience and cursings for disobedience. These can be seen as outdated by society today and very unnecessary, but the same principles still apply. The fact that this was several thousand years ago doesn't negate the principle at all. Deuteronomy 28, verse 1. "Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all nations of the earth. And these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of the Lord your God." What does it say now? "Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out." Are we obedient today? Of course not. And what is the result? We're reaping the curses of health problems, and at a fantastic cost. If you'll turn to 3 John 2, right towards the end of the New Testament, The Apostle John states that good health for the brethren is something that he prayed for. He knew all about the health laws, had seen and had been with Christ for 3.5 years. He had seen Jesus abide by the food laws. 3 John 2, it says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers." The politicians in the forthcoming election can use health as an item to prove that what they are doing is ever improving, whilst the opposition can go on about how much the National Health Service needs improving. Depends which side you're coming from. But not one of them on any side whatsoever has the answer. And only the return of Jesus Christ to rule the earth will put this matter right. So no, we can't vote on this issue either. The third area that has been a battleground is the economy. In recent years, we have seen interest rates fall to very low rates compared to previous years, when some people in the 1980s were paying up to 15% interest on their mortgages. We now have in the UK a base rate which is currently half of 1%, and there was thought that it might even go into negative. Of course, with very low interest rates, mortgages can be much more affordable, but what about those who get very little interest on their savings? Wherever there is an upside, there is usually a downside. We seem to have less unemployment than before, but with up to 50% young people going on to further education, maybe these figures are somewhat massaged. And many are working for a pittance, with the minimum wage being just £6.50 an hour. Standards of living for the bulk of the population seem to have risen over the last several decades. But at what cost? In many households, both parents seem to have to work in order to keep up with the Joneses, with very young children being dropped off at nurseries. The penny still hasn't dropped with many of these people, that very young children actually need their parents, particularly their mother, in the early years. But greed in most cases and necessity in other cases causes this course of action. Of course, if a woman has to work where there is no other viable alternative or option, it can be understood if they need to make ends meet. But usually this is to fuel and further material interests. Most people are not interested in cutting back on their expenditure and unnecessary spending. Just keep maxing out the credit cards seems to be the continuing behavior, which is dangerous indeed. The dangers of affluence, back to that again. The economy may look good at the moment, but over the last few decades, there have been some terrible times proving that the politicians of any persuasion do not have the long-term answers. When interest rates rise from their historic lows in the UK, so many may well be up to their neck in serious financial trouble. If they've got a mortgage at the moment and only paying probably 1 or 2%, just over base rate, if it starts to go up, instead of paying several hundred a month, it could probably double. So that would be misery for many people. Credit card seems to be at the highest level ever. The economy in the UK, and I suggest over here, and maybe in Canada and other areas, is held together almost supernaturally. Or is it supernaturally? And some of the taxation laws seem to favour the immoral, where those living together are treated more favourably from a taxation point of view than those who are married. Even homosexuals and lesbians are now treated, in spite of their immorality, as well as, and probably better than, those who conform to God's standard of marriage. In the world tomorrow, Jesus Christ will rule with wisdom and fairness, qualities that even elude the most gifted of human beings today. The economy and standard of living will be fantastic then. Imagine full employment and paying only your tithes, with no swathes of tax on everything that can be bought and sold. In this world, the new world, Married couples finish up to their eyeballs in debt when they set up home. But just imagine in the world tomorrow being given a couple of acres of land from the government as a wedding gift. Of course, there's no chance of that in this society. God's laws and statutes will be the laws of the land. Now, there's some tremendous wisdom in those statutes. That which is fascinating has to do with the selling of land. If a family had to sell their land inheritance, say, 10 years after the Jubilee, then the price for the 40-year lease will be 80% of the value of the lease of the land for the full 50 years. The price of the land went down the closer you got to the Jubilee. Today, we're used to seeing house prices rise and rise and rise. We know that we had, I think it was 2008, we had the crash, but today, house prices in the UK are back to normal again. Nothing changes. It's because people always want to see a profit out of the land and everything goes up with it. And that's part of the reason why we've had inflation over the years. The economy in the world tomorrow will be run by my candidate, but my candidate is not running in this election. The fourth area I want to briefly touch on is that of law and order. Now, that will be a real battleground in the UK election. Many city centres have now become no-go areas on a Friday and a Saturday evening as the binge drinking and lager-lout culture has taken hold, although we were told recently that binge drinking is on the decrease in the UK. I was amazed at that, but that's what they say. Generally, on a Saturday and a Sunday evening, you can't see a policeman for miles. Fights so often break out as the alcohol and drugs take their toll. City centres can be frightening places in the UK at the weekend. And there are some areas where the police don't go and which are run by those advocating Sharia law. What state have we come to? Even during the day, some older people are now frightened to go out of doors. And when they are indoors, there are those who break, enter, kill and steal. Stories of this abound in the press. Wherever you look, there are problems with law and order. If you'll turn to 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 to 5, we see the sort of behaviour at the end time. And it's clearly we are right towards the end. We know that perilous times are ahead, and what we are seeing now, which can be frightening, will be as nothing to what will come. For 2 Timothy 3 verse 1, but know this, that in the last day perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, and that can be lawless behavior, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, often Saturday night stuff, brutal, and plenty of that, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, and that can really apply to the weekend, a sort of a weekly release for so many people, having a form of godliness, people attending church at Christmas and Easter, attending the Pope's funeral and other important events, I say with tongue in cheek, but denying its power, and from such people turn away. In the world tomorrow, safety will be something that people will enjoy. If you'll turn to Jeremiah 32, verses 37 to 39, we know that this is in the future because in verse 40, he talks about God making an everlasting covenant. Jeremiah 32, verse 37. It says, behold, I will gather them out of all countries where I have driven them in my anger, in my fury, and in great wrath. I will bring them back to this place, and I will cause them to dwell safely. They shall be my people, and I will be their God. Then I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever, for the good of them and the children after them. I don't think that I need to labour the point. It's well known that in many countries around the world, including the UK, that there are huge problems with law and order. And not one of the politicians has the answer. In the world tomorrow, my candidate will set at right all of these ills that plague our society today. Just looking at those four areas, contentions between politicians over their different answers and the somewhat checkered history of their solutions must surely tell us that none of them has the answers. They may do their best, but as they don't take advice from the Word of God, they may come up with answers that are hugely deficient. A fifth and very contentious issue in the UK will be that of immigration and will feature highly. Now, this is a highly emotive subject, and every party has their own take on it. They have their own different answers, and of course, all of them are right. That's what they think. In fact, this issue will sway many voters who might ordinarily vote one way or another to register a protest vote. It will be high on the list of debates, and no party has the answer. They are of the world, and the upcoming days of unleavened bread teach us to come out of the world and not be part of the sinful way that envelops the whole of society. The third area I want to look at today are some of the moral issues that will not get debated. There are moral issues that will not get debated. Unfortunately, politicians of all persuasions seem to be convinced that they need to address just the material and the physical, and perhaps the vast majority of the population would agree with that and expect such an approach at an election. But there is an ethical and there is a moral dimension that we understand and the world does not. I want to cover just 3 areas under this section, and it's doubtful if any of these will be mentioned except in passing. I don't expect any of these issues really to be part of the political campaigning in the UK, probably not in the USA either. The first area that is a curse on our society is the murder of the unborn, taken lightly by the majority of the inhabitants of this land, but not by God himself. Let us look very quickly, very briefly at the abortion issue. Fallible politicians take a stance, but it is almost never, ever based on the Bible. And so let me just mention this today very briefly from the biblical perspective. In our booklet, Are You Born Again?, quite a bit of information is given on this subject. There is no question that abortion is murder, and yet it is legalized in the UK. Therefore, it is legalized murder and accepted. Nobody seems to argue with it today. Let's have a very quick look at this. We know that the soul is defined as any living thing composed of flesh and blood, including animals. But the spirit in man elevates humans above animals. Animals can't appreciate a wonderful sunset or a great oil painting. And Button, my little chihuahua, certainly can't appreciate great music, which is a great pity. But they can't. They're not elevated to that level. The spirit in man can be found in Job 32, verse 8. If you'll turn there, Job 32, verse 8. It says, Job 32, verse 8, but there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. I'm not turning there, but this spirit in man is also mentioned in Zechariah 12, verse 1. This spirit empowers the human brain and intellect and mind power. We see this explained in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 11, if you'll turn there. This passage of Scripture is about spiritual wisdom, which God ordained before the ages for our glory, as it states in verse 7. But let's look at 1 Corinthians 2, verse 11. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 11 says, for what man knows the things of a man, except the spirit of the man which is in him? Even so, no one knows the things of God except the Spirit of God. And so the spirit in man elevates human beings above all the animals. And this is an interesting, I think, quotation. Exodus 21, verses 22 to 23. Exodus 21, verses 22 and 23. It says, if men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall be punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. Verse 23, but if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life. And so the unborn here is seen as life. A correct understanding of the born-again process can help us understand the physical parallel, begettal, gestation and birth. You might like to just make a note of Acts 2 verse 38, Acts 2 verse 38, and 2 Corinthians 5 verse 5, because here we see that the Holy Spirit is imparted at the conception of spiritual life. And there is much more on this subject that could be said. So we see that the human spirit is imparted at the conception of physical life, and the Holy Spirit is imparted at the conception of spiritual life. Therefore, abortion at any time, for any reason, is murder. But the politicians don't believe that. So how could we vote for them? Although not born again in this life, we are already begotten children of God and heirs. This is on the spiritual level and is exactly the same on the physical level. But the politicians will never take the biblical line because they don't understand it. They have no idea. Everything they get is from their own minds. They don't think about looking in the Word of God. But the politicians, if they understood it, would never take the biblical line because they have little or no interest in it, and it certainly wouldn't win a lot of votes. As all of the political parties are in favor of abortion, there is no way that a true and committed Christian could ever vote for any of them. Let's look on to the next moral issue, that of homosexuality. Okay, so we've flogged this to death in the past. It's good for us to be reminded. All of the parties have homosexuals in their ranks, and all parties officially approve of this perversion, even now so-called marriages between them. Let's call it for what it is. It's perversion. If you'll turn to 1 Corinthians 6, verses 9 to 10, this is where we clearly read that neither homosexuals nor sodomites will inherit the kingdom of God. This is old ground, but worth re-mentioning. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 9. Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners will what? None of them will inherit the kingdom of God. However, in verse 11 it says, and such were some of you, but you were washed, but you were sanctified, but you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus and by the Spirit of God. So obviously, if someone repents of that lifestyle, that's fine, but not to stay in that lifestyle. And so repentant homosexuals can be forgiven if they give up their perversion. And I read in Time magazine this very week, it said, by a vote of members of the largest US Presbyterian denomination, the inclusion of same-sex unions in the church's definition of marriages was to be included. So I just scratched my head. If those who are supposed to understand the Bible can't get it right, what chance have the politicians? The third moral issue I want to take issue with today is that of drugs. Drug taking. It's another example where many politicians in the same party are often at odds with each other, let alone the opposition, so there's not much clarity there. It's a highly emotive subject again for so many, but what do we see when drug taking can take place, and what does it do particularly to the young taking it? The changing profile of dealers has also influenced prices across the country. Once the illicit drugs market was run by barons, but it was controlled by a select number of people. But the increase in competition means that these have now been overtaken and replaced by a multitude of traffickers who are forcing prices lower and making them more available. Now, this is one of the keys. It's one of the things that we probably tend to forget, that quite a number of senior politicians who grew up in the 1960s have admitted using drugs at that time. The view today of some of these politicians is that drugs are not that bad after all. No doubt they would express publicly, if it was in their public interest, a somewhat more acceptable version of their approach. The 1960s was a time when so many politicians, current leaders and opinion formers were teenagers themselves and were susceptible to the fads and the whims of society at that time, when they were at that young age. It was a time when heavy censorship was lifted, divorce and abortion made possible for ordinary people, homosexuality legalized, the pill was introduced, and drug taking started to become fashionable. That would inevitably have affected attitudes and future behavior for many. But back to drugs. There is no doubt that drugs are usually part and parcel of organized crime. Drugs wreck the lives of so many young people. Drugs can lead users to a lifetime of crime, and drugs can create all sorts of health problems. If you'll turn to Mark 12, verse 30, Mark 12, verse 30, this is where Jesus was answering a question from the scribes about which was the first commandment of all. Mark 12, verse 30. It says, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." You cannot love, obey, and worship the one true God through a drug-induced experience. Your heart will be somewhere else. You will be high, your mind blown, your strength zapped. Usually the drug taker is thinking about the next high that they've got to have, and where they can get it from and how they can pay for it, and often from the proceeds of crime. All political parties don't have the will, none of them have the will to tackle this curse. There always seems to be more pressing and urgent matters, but drug addiction leads to many other problems that it ought to be a high priority. My candidate, who is not standing at this election, will not allow drug taking and abuse in the world tomorrow. It simply won't be part of the culture of the day. Unfortunately, it's part of our degenerate society, and the politicians neither have the will nor the ability to solve it. Having looked at issues that will be debated and some of the moral issues that probably won't be part of the campaign, I want to look at one other issue, which is the coarsening of society. The coarsening and general deterioration of standards in society. Society has moved on to new lows in terms of decency and the rightness of things. Let me just mention a few of these very briefly. Alcoholism, we've always had it. It's always been there. But it's a curse, and our government in the UK tried to do something that was really, on hindsight, and some of us thought it at the time, was ridiculous, was to introduce 24-hour licenses for pubs and clubs. Their rationale was that with longer opening hours, drinkers wouldn't drink as much as they could when the pubs closed at 10:30. That was the rationale. They thought, erroneously and rather stupidly, that suddenly the British would accept the continental way, where drinkers linger longer over a drink, that's a tongue twister, in a warmer climate than we enjoy. It never happened. Different cultures, the standards of behaviour plummeted. And I mentioned about Saturday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday evening, the weekend in the UK in city centres is not a place to be. That never used to be that way. Human nature was not understood, and it was all down to flawed human reasoning. This type of behaviour will not be allowed when my candidate is in power. If you'll turn to Proverbs 20, verse 1. Proverbs 20, verse 1. Proverbs 20, verse 1 says, wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray is not wise. With drink, with too much wine or other intoxicants, many do and say things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. Not on about having a glass of wine with a meal. I'm on about people who imbibe far too much. And over a couple of pages in Proverbs 23, verses 30 to 33, we read, those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine, do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent and it stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things and your heart will utter perverse things. The other thing I want to mention is the use of foul language. Foul language can be heard in every corner of the UK and from both sexes and people of all ages. There was a time when a man would never swear in front of a lady. And if he did, he was told that that was not the way to be. Now, anything goes. In fact, the women are as bad as the men. Blasphemy forms a large part of this descent into an area that has become part and parcel of everyday life. When a particular company in the UK was allowed to use its initials in advertising on its clothing, this only aggravated the matter. Their initials form an anagram of a four-letter word, and it's now used, as we would have expected, in unacceptable phrases on their merchandise. We also have much antisocial behaviour and ridiculous political correctness, and many politicians they wring their hands at these things about this, but they do little, if anything, to remove such problems. They are certainly not candidates that any true Christian could vote for. There is more. There is much more that could be said, but time does not permit. But society now is so coarse in its behaviour, that there has been such an erosion and deterioration in standards in almost every area that it is a totally ungodly place. Our society in the UK and here in the USA. A few years ago, one politician said that it was not so much a clash of policies, but a clash of values. The values that these politicians have are not godly. In no way are they godly, and therefore must be rejected by God-fearing people. As an aside, I would say that whichever party wins power, that it may well prove to be a poisoned chalice, with so many problems to be tackled and resolved. But that's another story. If you'll turn to 1 John 2, verses 15 to 17, 1 John 2, verses 15 to 17, here we read that we are not to love the world or the things of the world. Politics is at the heart of the world. People love power, and politics is all about power. 1 John 2, verse 15. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. At the beginning of this sermon, I outlined the reasons we must not vote. I then briefly covered 5 battlegrounds that the parties will be hotly debating. And if anybody in America is ever interested in what happens over the pond in the UK and reads about it, they will see that the things that will be discussed will be education, health, the economy, law and order, and immigration. It's a cast iron guarantee. But none of the politicians and political parties are in alignment with biblical principles. I then went on to look at some of the moral issues that will not get debated. Abortion won't get debated. It will get debated because it's an accepted part of society. Homosexuality takes precedent over the Christian. The Christian can't say now what the Bible says about it without being cautioned by the police. And then drug taking. And then I looked at the coarsening of society and an erosion and deterioration in standards. And this has been allowed to develop, and in some cases promoted, by those politicians in power. There is more, so much more that could be said, but after hearing all of the information today, surely there can be no doubt that true Christians cannot and must not ever get involved in any way at the upcoming general election. We simply cannot vote. And the fact that maybe some in another or other Church of God organizations that now think it's okay to vote ought to listen to this sermon. And if they disagree, I would like to know where they disagree, because it's quite simple. We cannot vote for people who will be doing things that God disapproves of. It's not about voting for the lesser of the evils at all. We can't do as the bishops in the Church of England said, it is the duty of every Christian adult to vote, even though they may have to vote for something less than a vision that inspires us. I mean, what a thing to say. So we've got to vote for something that doesn't inspire us, something that is wrong, something that's not very good, but it might be a little bit better than the other side. The lesser of the evils is still evil, and it's highly doubtful if you will hear the Bible or God mentioned in the upcoming election campaign. God will allow to get into power those who will allow his purpose to be fulfilled. The upcoming days of unleavened bread teach us to put sin out of our lives, not bring it into our lives, which we would do if we voted. You see, I can't vote because my candidate is not standing.